In the dry winds of the American Southwest, the Apache learned to turn scarcity into abundance and survival into an art. Their meals were not just food, they were stories, traditions, and weapons against hunger. Every bite carried the echo of a hunt, the wisdom of elders, and the fierce independence of a people who thrived where others perished. But what exactly did they cook in those rugged lands? And how did they transform wild plants, game, and fire into meals worthy of warriors? Let's find out. The Apache hearth was never just a place to cook. It was a circle of life. Long before dawn, a faint glow of embers might already be pulsing in the center of camp, cradled by stones and tended with the care one might give to a child. The desert was cold in those hours, and fire offered not only heat, but also the promise of a meal to come. Gathering fuel was itself a craft. Mesquite wood, with its dense grain and fragrant smoke, was prized. Juniper and piñon, too, lent their own flavors to whatever sizzled above the flames. Cooking was rarely a rushed affair. It was about coaxing flavor slowly from the land's gifts, letting smoke and heat seep into every fiber. Here, rabbits and prairie dogs caught in woven traps or hunted with arrows might roast on sticks, the fat dripping into the fire and hissing in a language as old as mankind. A pot, blackened by years of use, might hang just above the flames, simmering a stew that married meat with roots, seeds, and wild herbs. The act of cooking was communal. Children fetched water from nearby streams. Women, who held the deep knowledge of edible plants, ground seeds between stones, their rhythmic motion a heartbeat in its own right. Men, returning from a hunt, would kneel by the fire, their silence heavy with both exhaustion and pride. Meals were not extravagant in the modern sense. They were practical, efficient, and yet by the standards of a people living in unforgiving landscapes, they were feasts. The fire was the constant, the gathering point, the invisible thread binding hunter, gatherer, and child into a single unbroken chain. For the Apache, hunting was never a casual act. It was sacred. Before arrows were loosed or snares set, a hunter would often whisper a silent prayer to the spirit of the animal he sought. This was not superstition. It was respect, the acknowledgement that survival meant taking life, and that such a gift demanded gratitude. The animals varied with the land: deer in the wooded mountain slopes, antelope on the plains, turkey in the forests, and fish from the rare but treasured streams. Once the kill was made, the camp came alive with preparation. The women were the masters of transforming raw meat into sustaining dishes. Fresh meat might be roasted quickly for the hunters, who returned hungry and in need of strength. The rest would be cut into thin strips, salted if possible, and hung high on racks above smoky fires. This was more than preservation, it was strategy. Dried meat, or pemmican, when mixed with fat and berries, could feed a warrior far from camp, giving him the endurance to fight or travel for days. There was ceremony in the feast. Around the fire, meat was shared in order of age and honor, elders first, then warriors, then women and children. Each bite was a connection to the land and to each other. The hunt's success was celebrated, not as a personal victory, but as the survival of the entire band. Mesquite trees were more than shade in the Apache homeland. They were a pantry, a medicine chest, and a lifeline. Every part of the tree could be used, but it was the long, pale pods that were the true treasure. In summer and early autumn, the pods would be harvested, their sweetness intensifying under the desert sun. Women gathered them in woven baskets, careful to avoid shaking loose the seeds prematurely. Once collected, the pods were laid out to dry even further, becoming brittle and fragrant. Then came the grinding, a slow, deliberate process on flat stones. The result was a golden brown meal, naturally sweet and rich in protein. It could be eaten as a paste, mixed with water into a refreshing drink, or added to breads and porridges. In lean months, mesquite flour could sustain life when fresh meat and plants were scarce. The Apache also used the wood for smoking meats, adding a flavor that endured long after the food was gone. Even the gum of the tree had value. It could soothe sore throats, heal wounds, and serve as glue for repairs. In the Apache world, mesquite was proof that the desert was never barren for those who knew its secrets. Sweetness could be coaxed from thorn and heat, and a tree could feed the spirit as well as the body. The Apache were often called nomadic, but the truth was more complex. While they moved with the seasons, they also knew the secret places where the land quietly grew rich with life. In sheltered valleys, beside seeps and springs, nature planted what might as well have been hidden gardens, and the Apache knew exactly when to visit them. Wild onions and garlic were dug from the earth, their pungent scent promising flavor and health. Prickly pear cactus, stripped of its spines with deft hands, provided tender pads for roasting and sweet ruby red fruit for eating raw or drying. In certain high plains regions, wild potatoes grew in the soil, small but nourishing. Women led these foraging missions, often with children in tow. Each plant was gathered with care, the roots or seeds left behind to grow again. This was a form of stewardship, taking only what was needed, ensuring that the land would give again the next season. Cooking these finds often meant roasting over hot stones or boiling in clay pots. Wild greens might be added to meat stews, cactus fruit could be mashed into a sweet pulp, and wild tubers would be baked in the coals until their skins cracked. These meals might not have seemed like a feast to an outsider, but to the Apache, they were both survival and celebration, a reminder that the land, when treated with respect, always repaid its debt. There was a sound in Apache camps that was as constant as the wind, the rasp and grind of stone against stone. Women knelt over metates, flat grinding stones worn smooth by years of use, turning seeds into life itself. Corn was not as central to the Apache diet as it was for some neighboring tribes, but when available, it was precious. Ground into meal, it could be made into small cakes or dumplings, boiled, roasted, or fried on hot stones. More often, the Apache relied on other seeds: amaranth, sunflower, or grass seeds collected in woven baskets and parched over the fire before grinding. These seed meals were mixed with water into a dough, then flattened and cooked directly on heated stones or in shallow pits lined with coals. The result was a dense, nourishing bread that traveled well and lasted for days. Bread was not eaten casually. It was fuel for the body, a portable meal for warriors on the move. Sometimes it was flavored with mesquite meal for sweetness or mixed with wild herbs for variety. This simple food, born from grinding stones and careful hands, carried Apache warriors across deserts, mountains, and battlefields. In the harsh landscapes of the Southwest, few plants gave more generously than agave. Its thick, spiny leaves hid a core packed with sweet, starchy pulp, and the Apache knew exactly how to unlock it. Harvesting agave was dangerous work. The sharp tips could pierce skin like needles, and the leaves themselves were armored in serrated edges. But once cut, the heart's large, fibrous bulbs were carried back to camp for a cooking process unlike any other. A pit was dug, lined with hot stones, and filled with layers of agave hearts and green leaves. The whole thing was covered and left to cook slowly for days. Inside, the agave transformed, its starches turning into sugars, its fibers soft enough to chew. The smell, sweet, smoky, and earthy, drifted through camp long before the pit was opened. When finally uncovered, the hearts were pulled apart in steaming strands, eaten fresh or pounded into cakes for later. The flavor was unlike anything else, sweet, smoky, and sustaining. This was food for feasts, for long journeys, and for moments when the Apache wanted not just to survive, but to savor the desert's rare luxuries. For the Apache, mobility was survival. Camps could be abandoned overnight, trails could stretch for hundreds of miles, and warriors might ride for days without a chance to hunt. Fresh meat, though precious, could not always be eaten at once. The answer lay in the oldest preservation method known to humankind: smoke. Thin strips of venison, bison, rabbit, or turkey were hung on wooden racks over low fires, the smoke from mesquite or juniper curling around them like a protective spirit. This was not a quick process. Hours, sometimes days, were needed to fully dry the meat, removing every trace of moisture so that it could last for weeks without spoiling. Sometimes, the dried meat was ground into powder and mixed with melted fat and dried berries, forming a dense, calorie-packed food called pemmican. Small, portable, and nearly imperishable, it was perfect for long hunts or war expeditions. This was the Apache equivalent of rations, but far richer in taste and nutrition than anything a soldier might carry today. Smoked meat was more than a food, it was security. It meant that a sudden drought, a failed hunt, or an unexpected journey would not bring hunger. In the firelight, as the smoke drifted into the night sky, the Apache could rest, knowing they carried the strength of many meals into the unknown. For the Apache, food was never only about the body, it was about the spirit. Certain meals were prepared for dances, naming ceremonies, or the return of warriors from battle. The act of cooking for these occasions was sacred, and every ingredient carried meaning. In the Na'i'i ceremony, the sunrise dance marking a young woman's coming of age, women worked for days to prepare special dishes. Corn, if available, might be ground and cooked into a sweet pudding. Meat was roasted in large quantities, enough to feed visiting relatives and friends who traveled far to witness the event. Wild berries were gathered in advance, their tartness a bright counterpoint to the richness of meat and bread. Sharing was at the heart of these feasts. Elders received the first servings not out of hierarchy alone, but from respect for the wisdom they carried. Children were fed next, their laughter mingling with the crackle of the fire. In these moments, the Apache table, whether a blanket spread on the ground or a circle around the hearth, was a place of unity. These meals were not measured in portions or recipes. They were measured in memories, in the bonds strengthened with every shared bite. Food bound the Apache to each other, to their ancestors, and to the land that had always sustained them. From the smoky scent of mesquite to the sweetness of roasted agave, the Apache table was a place where the land's gifts were transformed into survival, strength, and celebration. These were meals born of necessity, but elevated by tradition, a cuisine shaped by warriors and nurturers alike. Which of these ancient dishes would you most want to taste? Share your thoughts, and let the past feed your curiosity.